Pele leaned in and said something to Freddie.
Don't let them change you. Keep working on what makes you different and what makes you special. It was great advice, but it caused me some problems.
But what could change Freddie Adu?
Soccer is going to explode, and it's going to be around this kid.
We were the Beatles. Everywhere we went, it was the Freddie show.
And with that came the expectation, and with that came the pressure.
New episodes of American Prodigy drop Tuesdays from Blue Wire Podcasts.
What is up, Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale, coming at you without my fantastic co-host, Adam Frommel. I am, however, super excited to keep our team look-ahead train a-rolling. We're going to be covering the Atlanta Hawks and Memphis Grizzlies in depth today. For the Atlanta Hawks, who are first up, I spoke with Sarah K. Spencer. She does a fantastic job of covering the Hawks for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Follow her on Twitter at Sarah_K_Spence. Spence is spelled S-P-E-N-C-E. After we speak with her, we bring on Sharon Brown to talk all things Memphis Grizzlies. She covers the Grizzlies for the Memphis Flyer. She is also a founding editor of All Heart in Hoop City. She writes for Dime Up Rocks as well, and she's also the host of the Shy Show podcast. Be sure to follow her on Twitter, also a fantastic follow, at Sharon Shy Brown. That's at SharonShybrown. Before we dive into these ultra fun look-aheads, just want to remind, implore, beg, plead with everyone to continue rating, reviewing, and subscribing to us wherever you're getting your podcasts. However, even if you're not on iTunes, we really do appreciate it if you head over there anyway. Search Hardwood Knocks, throw us a rating, 5 stars only, write that review. If it has constructive criticism, we will read it. We're always open to that constructive criticism. Most importantly, though, please just subscribe. If you're new here, just listening because you're a Hawks fan or Grizzlies fan that follows Sarah or Sharon respectively, subscribe. Download our episodes. You won't regret it, or at least it won't be the thing you regret most in your life. I can promise you that. Without further delay, though, let's get to the Atlanta Hawks with Sarah K. Spencer, and then get to the Grizzlies with Sharon Brown. Sarah, welcome to the Hardwood Knocks podcast. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and talk some Atlanta Hawks with me. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. Had a true off day yesterday, so that's exciting and rare this time of year. And yeah, I'm excited to talk some hoops.
A true off day feels like it's rare this time of year, so congratulations to you for that. Hopefully you'll eventually get another one. So you got to be recovering from a whirlwind offseason at this point. And I think the best question to ask to start is, it was such a whirlwind and they had more cap space than any other team in the league. And I think people assumed that they would spend it in some form. Did you anticipate that it was going to end up being that aggressively?
You know, so they had said GM Travis Schlenk had said a few times that we might look to be more aggressive if there are people who, you know, we like out there. I didn't exactly know what to expect because the free agency class and some of the guys that were available, I wasn't sure if I wasn't as high on that free agency class, and I wasn't exactly sure what would happen. But, you know, I think this team has been talking about, now it's been, I remember the first time Lloyd Pierce mentioned making the playoffs, and that was early March. Obviously, the season got suspended March 11th. Players have kind of hopped on board that, and I think this franchise just feels like it's time to start improving. I don't necessarily know. Schlenk is one who won't say, you know, it's not like playoffs or bust or anything like that. But this team, I think, felt, okay, it's time to start improving. It's time to start giving Trae Young some quality vets around him, some quality options around him. When you look at the roster surrounding Trae, surrounding some of their main guys, the past 2 years, it's not going to win games in the NBA. They needed to improve.
Right.
They needed to improve. They needed to give him more weapons. They needed to add more. They needed to add more defense. They needed to add a backup point guard who run the offense in Trae Young's stead. So they don't score like 12 points fewer per game. You know, a whole litany of things they had to address. And I think they just decided this is the time we need to do it. We need to start improving, and we need to do it right now. So I think they had the money and they found the guys who were hopping on board in free agency. And, I think those guys signed on to come win. So I think the Hawks basically said, okay, we have to construct the roster accordingly. So I don't know if I expected them to be that aggressive, but looking back with the most cap space in the league and also the desire to finally get the ship kind of turned around, I think it makes sense.
And they end up with, in Bogdanovic and Gallo, probably two of the top 5 guys that were expected to maybe change teams. Like, we all knew Anthony Davis wasn't going anywhere. So when you looked at like actual gettable free agents, like they were probably 2 of the top 5. And so in that essence, like, it ends up being a pretty big offseason win for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things, maybe people don't realize, like a lot of people know, hey, I've written this a ton. The Hawks were the worst 3-point shooting team in the league last year. They shot 33.3% from 3. That's obviously not good, especially considering how decimated like the Warriors were, but when you actually look at the Hawks returning guys, that like those returning guys shot at about league average or higher. It was the supporting staff. It was the other players who were not doing very well. So yeah, now you look at this and you're like, wow, this is going to be a pretty good shooting team if everything goes according to plan, because they added 2 guys who are, Gallo is obviously an elite offensive player, and is much more shooter, but adds a ton of shooting to a team that desperately needed it. And Bogey is a very, very good fit in this backcourt alongside Trae Young. They like his versatility. They like how he can create for himself and for others. So both of those guys are really good at catch and shoot, so they're going to play really well along Trae Young. It's just Trae Young just has a lot more weapons around him. Those guys really beef up the offense. It'll be interesting to see how this defense comes together. They might have elite offense and just kind of go offense first, but it'll be interesting to see how throughout the season, particularly if they do get to the playoffs, how they're able to stop teams and stuff like that. Clint Capela should help with that. There's a lot of moving pieces with this team that they're still kind of figuring out. They're figuring out chemistry. But offense-wise, yes, those 2 guys really, really boost the offense, and this team really needed it.
I don't know if this has been – maybe it's not – the criticism isn't the right word, but it feels like the question being asked is whether Trae Young needs to play more like James Harden, where he just commandeers so many of the possessions, or can you get him moving off the ball like a Stephen Curry? And if there's actual criticism, you just mentioned it, like the supporting cast he's played with has been so just below replacement level. How are you ever supposed to get him moving off the ball? They were in like the 2nd percentile or something of offensive efficiency when he was off the court. And when he was on the court, he had to carry them to around league average. With Bogey and Gallo, and I guess to a lesser extent like Rondo, do you envision them trying to get him moving off the ball? And do you think that that's something that he can have an impact on? Or do you get the sense that maybe he does need to be on the ball to have his best type of impact?
Well, Trae Young is always going to be, heavily on the ball, to an extent, because he gives them the best option to win when he's leading the offense. He's got great vision, which, you can see all the time, but obviously everyone sees this when you see him, threading a pass just so, and it like blows up on Twitter and goes viral. But so he gives them the best chance to win with the ball in his hands very often. However, they're already moving him off the ball more. This happened in their 2nd preseason game versus the Magic, which they won, and they just looked way better. They shot, I think it was almost 40% from 3. It's a preseason game, so who the heck, cares? Like,
right.
You shouldn't do it. They're already moving him off the ball more. Like, I remember there was one possession where I think it was Bogey who brought the ball up and got it to Trae right in the corner. It was like an open corner 3. So yeah, they're already doing that a little bit more. And Schlenk has talked about that before. Obviously, he's a Golden State guy to your previous statement. So, yeah, he's said a lot about how sometimes it's easiest to score when the ball's not in your hands because guys already, people have like triple team Trae before, like he's so visible on the court that sometimes moving him off is actually the best thing you can do for him. Right. Because it opens him up in so many different ways. So they're already doing that a little bit more. He's always going to be on the ball a lot, but I think something they have the freedom to do now that they did not last year is move him off it and kind of just throw a question mark at the defense. Now they've got to think a little bit more. Whereas before it was like, well, of course Trae's going to have the ball. So it adds another element to their offense. And I think that's something that they're going to have a lot of fun experimenting with this season because they have the depth to do it. They have the guys to do it. Whereas last year, they really didn't even have a backup point guard I'm not even going to say just a backup point guard. They didn't have the depth to have a successful second unit, and now you have someone like Gallo coming off the bench, which is kind of funny. Like he's obviously a starting caliber guy, but he's coming off the bench and it's like, holy cow, that's leaps and bounds, of an improvement. So there's going to be a lot of things they have the freedom to do this year that they didn't before. And one of those is experimenting and having fun with Trae, being able to be off the ball and creating a little bit more in that way.
Should have prefaced it with this. So I have not watched pretty much any preseason basketball because I'm in the middle of writing about the top 100 players of Bleacher Report and don't want to be influenced by what I see in the preseason, as soon as that sounds. So
Gotcha.
Please feel free to dunk on any ignorant takes that have been disproven during preseason basketball. You mentioned that Gallinari is going to be coming off the bench, and that was something in a vacuum. It makes sense just because he's kind of like an offense unto himself, just because, like you said, he is a good shooter, but he just does so much more in terms of getting to the foul line, his pull-up jumper, just has like some really great fakes that can get defenders moving. But he's also their highest paid player, and I didn't expect Travis Schlenk to just come right out and say, yeah, we signed him with the intention of coming off the bench. And so my question is, do you see that lasting like all season? Do you think maybe it ends up being more matchup based, their starting five, or are they just really committed to having Gallo run this second unit?
Potentially. I think one thing that's important to remember with Gallo is that I don't think he hasn't played more than 70 games in several
Ever, basically, yeah.
Yeah, like he hasn't played more than 70 games in several years, basically ever since the year he tore his ACL, which was a handful of years ago. I wish I could remember on the spot. But, and like last year with the Thunder, he wasn't playing on the second night of back-to-backs very much, is from what I looked up. So, there's going to be, I think that was one of the first questions that a lot of people had is like, how are John Collins and Gallo going to fit together? How are Clint Capela and John Collins going to fit together? How's John Collins and Gallo going to, all this kind of, what about Gallo and Clint, because they have kind of an interesting situation in their front court, and with John, who, by the way, led the team in 3-point shooting last year at 40.1%. So it's not like he can't space things out. But yeah, with Gallo, I think that probably, my gut says they'll probably kind of find a starting lineup that they're comfortable with and roll with it, but rotate accordingly with what they need. I mean, he's going to get time, like even if he comes off the bench or whatever. I would argue that overall playing time closing lineups is probably important, but of course everybody wants to start. Like that's always going to be the case. I think that he'll definitely be involved in a ton of offense first lineups, a ton of lineups where, okay, we need crazy spacing. We're getting to the line. We're doing this. We're doing that. Like, I think they're going to use him in a litany of offense first ways. I don't know that if guys get hurt, you never know what's going to happen throughout the season. Like, yeah, I could see him starting a few games here and there. But I think for now, I think they're pretty committed to Collins there, just because John has grown a little bit as a defender. He last year was averaging 20 plus points, 10 plus rebounds. So it's not like John is like a downgrade from Gallo, they're just very different, So yeah, that's something that's going to be fun to watch with this team, is that now they have so many different things that they can do. Like, okay, do they go defense first lineup? Do they go offense first lineup? How about a healthy mix? Like, what, like it's going to be fun to see how they experiment with that. I could see Gallo starting here and there, but I think for now they're kind of comfortable with John, and just using Gallo as like a huge advantage off the bench.
And I mean, Gallo should basically play the 4 anyway at this point, so that limits the amount of time he's playing at the 3. That being said, I would assume they want their 5 best players on the court together, like at some point, where you're looking at Capela, Bogey, Young, Collins, and Gallo. How does that like complicate the wing rotation? Because you have Cam Reddish, you have DeAndre Hunter, you have Kevin Huerter, and even Kris Dunn was defending wings for Chicago last year. So like, how do you sort of envision just the wing rotation shaking out for this team after the starting 5? Is that even set? Like, is it just Cam Reddish is going to be playing with Bogey? Is that how they're going to work this?
Yeah, they've certainly got a ton of depth and riches at wing, which, I also say that because even though they acquired Kris Dunn, who was the most important defensive signing, to state the utter obvious, they didn't really, they added a lot of offense. They did add Rondo, who's going to be like a cerebral guy, a leader, and if they come playoffs,
I liked the playoff incentives to give him some regular season incentive to try. I thought that was very smart.
Right. And they needed that though, because they lost Vince Carter, so they need, this is still the team, the team's core is still like 23, 22, 21, so they wanted that. But no, Kris Dunn was a very important defensive signing for them. So they're gonna need him with some guys who just cooked the Hawks last year. And they're just gonna, Coach Lloyd Pierce has talked about how Kris Dunn doesn't necessarily look to switch as much as he's just like deployed onto a guy. That's my matchup. I'm just like, I'm just on this guy. So it'll be interesting to see how they use them, if they want him to do more of that or if they adjust to more of him. But yeah, as far as all the wings go, what's interesting is that they added, Bogey, they added Kris Dunn, but they also returned guys who look a lot better. Going into this season, that was another question is, what does this mean for the young wings? What does this mean for Cam Reddish? What does this mean for Kevin Huerter? What does this mean for DeAndre Hunter? Because they added a lot of guys who kind of overlap. Perhaps with the exception of DeAndre Hunter, who, can play the 4, but right now they're playing him at the 3. And you know what? He looks really good. He looks much more aggressive. He's getting to the line more. He looks much more confident. And he just looks less, I guess, maybe hesitant, like that when you're a rookie and you're just confused, like, wait, where do I go? Like that's not there anymore because he just looks so much more comfortable. He looks really good. Cam Reddish has looked really good. He's obviously kind of a little bit more of a defensive guy right now, but his shot looks a lot better. He looks much more in control. He looks much more steady. Kevin Huerter can really play 1 through 3. Like, he's a very versatile guy. So that's going to help him in terms of playing time. He played a lot of point guard last year, and he's one of the best passers on the team. But because he's been hurt so much, people don't see that as much. You kind of think of him as like a Duncan Robinson, just like shooting up threes and then,
right.
But that's not really what he is. He actually can handle the ball really well. He's not, he's not just a shooter. He's very much, he can do a lot of different things. So, do those guys' minutes get squeezed? Marginally, yeah, because, you just have more guys who are going to play. That's going to happen. But I think that as far as how they look, because I was kind of thinking, if those guys don't look a lot better, who knows, how much they're going to play, who knows exactly what's going to happen with stuff like that. But they look a lot better, and they look like they're playing like, hey, we got some competition, we gotta really turn it up, and they are. So, I don't know exactly how that will sort itself out. I mean, DeAndre Hunter just positionally seems like he'll play quite a bit again. Cam is, good defensively, and he looks like he's getting better. Kevin can play 3 positions basically. So those guys, I think the important thing for them is like they're gonna have the opportunity to keep developing and keep, they're still. I mean, Cam Reddish is 21,
Right.
so they're still, but they're. I think a lot of people were worried, like, what does this mean for them? Well, I mean, it means that the competition seems to be doing good things for them because they look really good. They look like they've put in a lot of work. So I don't know exactly how it'll end up. All I know is that Lloyd Pierce last year had precious few options a lot of times because of, guys on the roster who just weren't going to play. And then, you had 2 rookies who were starting and, you just had a lot of guys. You didn't have very many options. And now you have so many. It's going to be tough. Guys are going to have to understand if we want to win and win at a high level, I have to be okay with playing time. I have to be okay with that. Solomon Hill, I don't know if you've ever spoken with Solomon Hill, but
I have not.
He's a really fun guy. And obviously him and Rondo are the two who are coming off of like being in the finals. And he said a lot of good things about how he's talked to the team about how, regardless of playing time, you got to know that like our happiness has to come from winning. And when you have this many guys, like maybe it can,
Yeah, I can't. If I was trying to figure out before this who would be the one to get squeezed among the 3 of them.
Yeah.
If Hunter's going to be able to play the 3, and it's probably not going to be him, and they have equity just invested in him because of what they gave up to get him. Like I was not a fan of that move, but I also can't quit Cam Reddish. Like he shot the ball so well from 3-point range, like the latter quarter of last season. Do you buy into that from him? But then there's also, you mentioned about Kevin Huerter, and I think it's probably the biggest misconception about him is like towards the end of that rookie season, like before last year, that's when they started putting the ball in his hands more, and it like took you off guard how much he was able to create. And so it's like, oh, well, he's probably the best like off the dribble scorer of these 3. And that's like the most important skill in basketball right now. So you just look at these 3 guys, and just me being like a million miles away from the situation, I can't identify which one is going to get squeezed. I came into this thinking it would be Hunter, but then I come back to the equity they have in him, and you're talking about, well, he's been playing really well at the 3, and so you want positionally someone who can go to the 3 and the 4 for you. And so now I'm like, you know what? Maybe they need to just get super small, play all 3 of them at the same time, stick Hunter at the 5. Like it's too hard for me to like choose. So do you have any like inkling, if you had to guess, which one might be the one to see their playing time get butchered the most of this group?
Well, I could tell you right now, it does not seem like it would be Deandre Hunter. That's my inkling, is that it doesn't seem like it would be him, just because he's playing really well. I guess the way I would say it is he's doing exactly what they need him to do. This is what they needed from him. And positionally, that was as far as like, a starting 5, like wherever they are, that was like the one area where I was like, what are they going to do with that? I wonder what they're going to do. And he's looked really good. I don't think it'll be DeAndre Hunter. I mean, you never know. Like again, it's preseason, so you could, once guys like dial things up, once games start to matter, this might all go out the window. I don't think so, but you never know once minutes actually start to matter a little bit more. But DeAndre's looked really good, and this is what they needed from him. They needed him to take a step forward defensively, be more aggressive on both ends. That's what he worked on the whole offseason, and it looks like it's happening so far. He still needs to talk more. Both DeAndre Hunter and Cam Reddish are very quiet guys, kind of by nature. So they're still learning. So you gotta talk a little bit more, especially defensively. So I don't know. But probably not DeAndre right now would be my answer. Kevin and Cam, maybe a little bit, but everyone, a lot of guys' minutes are going to go down a little bit more, because now you don't have to. Now you have good guys coming off the bench, and even guys coming off the bench, I think, can play a good role on a good team if everything keeps going the right direction. But I think the most important thing from an X's and O's standpoint, regardless of playing time, is that those guys have clearly continued from where they left off last season, which is the most important thing, like, for the franchise, is that, you know, okay, they've continued, they're going to get playing time, they're going to continue to be able to develop, which was the biggest question, is just like, oh no, are they going to get so little playing time that, you know, and no, that's not the case. They look good.
Do you have any impressions of the Clint Capela fit so far, or even just, you know, his chemistry with Trae, or just how he's moving post heel injury that really nagged him last season?
So it's hard to say just yet, because Clint, there's a couple things that you can tell right off the bat with Clint Capela. Number one is that the Hawks were not a good rebounding team at all last year, particularly when John Collins was gone for 25 games, when he was suspended. They were like very much at the bottom of the league. John came back, got a little better. But overall, that was a problem for them. Clint, very quickly, you can tell, is going to just, I mean, not that this is a big shocking surprise, but just seeing it firsthand, Clint is already helping them so much in that way. I think I talked to Kevin Huerter about this, and Kevin was like, yeah, I think Clint got like the 14 easiest rebounds I've ever seen in my life. Like, he just has a knack for being there. And I mean, it sounds so simple, but last year the Hawks didn't have this. But he just has a knack for being in the right place at the right time. And he's also a really, really good second effort guy. That's just who he is. He's just a workhorse, really good second effort guy. He's always going to go for it, always going to be there, always going to put that time and effort in. So right off the bat, you can tell that that's going to be his bread and butter and help them so much. Yeah, as far as how he fits with Trae, I don't think that's, you know, Clint just gives Trae another, you know, running, you know, threat. But I will say with Clint right now, because he has been out for so long, he already is like, you know, giving them a boost in some ways, but you can tell he is not at 100% as far as like being in game shape. So some stuff it's hard to tell, because he really does not look like he has his legs underneath him yet. He doesn't look injured. It's just like, you know, you're trying to like bang with these guys, right, you know, down low, and you're just not, you don't quite have your sea legs, you know, under you yet. So it just looks like, and a lot of guys have been very forthcoming about that. You know, Lloyd Pierce has said, with as much as he's doing already, he's nowhere near where he will be in terms of just athleticism, in terms of just like getting up and down the court, like conditioning. So right now it's a little hard to tell exactly how everything will come together on the Clint Capela front, although he's helping them in some ways already, because he's not as smooth or as sharp as he will be. He's still got a long ways to go. But, you know, the guy hasn't played since like January.
Right.
He hasn't played since the Hawks acquired him from Houston at last season's trade deadline, which I know time is kind of a flat circle these days.
Yeah, what is time anymore? Yeah.
No, zero concept for any kind of time at all. But yeah, so he hasn't played since January. And he only started feeling better and started being able to like work out at a normal level like over the summer. So it's slow and steady with him. And I think that I'll be able to give you a better answer on that once he's moving around a little bit better.
Yeah, so, you know, you're talking about players haven't played since March 11th, and he played January 29th was the last time he played. So you're talking about like 10 months as opposed to like it's an extra almost 2 months tacked on. And he was injured.
Yeah, and in Houston, one of the reasons why they were so cautious with him is because when he had that injury, he kind of tried to play through it. And he said, like, I shouldn't have done that. I mean, because essentially it was like a bad bone bruise and just a nagging heel injury, which when you're a big guy, you know, you put a lot goes into that heel. And he tried to play through it. And he said, this has been months ago now, but he said, you know, I shouldn't have tried to play through it, basically. And that kind of like added to it a little bit. So that's why they were so cautious with him, is like, okay, we're not going to make you play through anything. We're just going to let you, you know, truly going to let you heal. So I think it was the right philosophy. But now it's just like, because they took that approach, he really hasn't done much, you know? And, that's probably good for the idea of like healing. But now, this is what it's for. It's preseason. Like, it's okay if you don't look 100%. Like, again, these games don't count much. Like, the Hawks have said a lot about how this is an extension of practice. We're just, we're scrimmaging against someone who's not us, So this is what it's for. And I think he'll get up to speed, slow and steady.
And speaking of guys who have not played in roughly a zillion years, I think something that's probably flown under the radar because of the offseason they had, or not flown under the radar, but just forgotten, they had the number 6 pick in the draft. And so you have Onyeka Okongwu, and I know he's been dealing with some left foot stuff, but once he's healthy, do you envision him having a role for this team? Because I feel like it's probably easier to commit developmental minutes to guys that you've actually seen play in the NBA before. And now you're talking about, he's a top 6 pick, but he's on a team that clearly has playoff aspirations. And so once he's at full strength, do you see him getting a good amount of backup 5 minutes, or do you maybe see John Collins maybe playing more in that role than him?
So right now, John Collins has played a decent bit at the 5, but I think some of that is Clint Capela is, coming along nice and slow, and, they're getting him up to speed. And also just Okongwu not being ready to go yet, although I think he's going to be reevaluated December 18th. So he sounds pretty close to return, honestly. And he's been doing contact work and stuff like that. So they like that. They consistently say, whether it's Travis Schlenk, Lloyd Pierce, whoever, they consistently say that they like John Collins at the 4. He can play at the 5. He played at the 5 a ton last season. But the big reason for that is because they were searching for answers at center.
Bruno Fernando was not it.
They had Alex Lynn for a while, who was struggling a lot offensively. He wasn't, just was struggling offensively. They had Damian Jones, who underperformed. They had Bruno, who, was a rookie and struggling here and there. They had Dwayne Dedmon, who only played 10 games. I mean, they picked him up at the trade deadline, and he was hurt a good bit. Didn't play very, very well while he was there. He only played 10 games also. So all that to say, they were center and probably backup point guard were the 2 positions that they were searching for answers kind of the whole season. And so, when you have a guy like John who can just slide over, I mean, sometimes it's tough defensively, but that was the lineup that they had the most success when they played Trae Young, Cam Reddish, Kevin Huerter, Deandre Hunter, John Collins together, which only happened in like 20 games. Like, it didn't happen very much because of suspensions, moving parts, injuries. That group actually had a pretty decent net rating. Like, they were pretty good together, but they see John Collins mostly as a power forward. I think they'll deploy him situationally as a 5 because he can do that. But no, I think Onyeka will get time. I don't think he'll get a ton of time, but I think he'll be a fine. I think they'll use him as a backup center. So, and some of that is, it's interesting because he almost looks like a 4. Like, he doesn't necessarily look like he's a little bit shorter than maybe you'd want. But I also, I'm hesitant to talk too much about it because I really haven't seen the guy much. Like, obviously we're not going to the practice facility, so I haven't seen him, in any kind of, practice situation. I haven't seen him in a game yet because he's not playing. So I'm not exactly sure, but I know that they're high on his ability to defend, which you got to see how that translates, and I haven't seen that, but I know they're high on his ability to defend. He's a good rebounder. And also they are confident that with time, his shot will develop, which on paper, I was kind of like raising my eyebrows at that a little bit because he didn't do much of that at USC. If at all. But they're confident that his shot will develop over time, and that he'll be able to space the floor a little bit for them. So yeah, no, I think they want him to develop. They're very high on him. I think that they'll just kind of use him as a backup center. Exactly how much playing time that'll add up to, I don't know. And it's really, really hard to speculate when I haven't seen him play. But I think they'll use him, and I think they'll, it'll depend on, the time, place, game, whatever, but I think they'll use him.
Does their offseason impact their long-term view of John Collins? Maybe the likelihood of whether they give him an extension or not? Because if we view him as a 4 or 5, they now have like 4 guys who can play, like, just 4 guys you could view as the core that can play each of those spots, where you have Capela and Okongwu at the 5, and you have Hunter and Gallo now at the 4. And so does that have any impact on just how they value John Collins moving forward?
I don't necessarily think so. I think that John Collins has kind of been, because obviously he came a year before Trae and Kevin, so he's now he's going into his 4th year potentially. So John Collins has kind of been a cornerstone of the rebuild, from the beginning of the Travis Schlenk era here in Atlanta. So I don't know. I mean, it raises questions certainly, but I think if they can get a deal done, I think they still really like what John Collins brings to this team. It is kind of interesting construction, but again, with Gallo, you got to remember he's like 9 years older than John and hasn't played 70 games in a long time. With Okongwu, we don't really know what we have yet, Clint, yes, but John's not really a 5. They view him as a 4. Deandre can't play the 4, but right now he's not. They're really playing him at the 3. So there are like some fit questions if guys do certain things, but then there's a way they also fit together, if that makes sense. They can make it work. But I think it's just kind of going to come down to, I think basketball wise, I think they can make it work. I think it's just going to come down to if they can get a deal done. John has talked about, being in the conversation for a max deal, but I don't know if that's, I don't know that that's, you see guys who have taken more team friendly deals than that are kind of on his level. And so I don't know. It might just come down to money. I don't know, and they might also say, let's see how this works for a year, because we don't necessarily have to figure it out right now. Like, let's see how it works. Let's see how the roster we put together works, and go from there, because they don't necessarily have anything to lose from doing that. So it is a big question for sure.
I have no idea how to value him, like looking at what he could be worth. Like, you want someone at the 4 who's shooting over 40% from 3 and has like a pretty good floor game now too. But like, what do you pay him if you don't view him as like a defensive building block, or someone who can at least give you minutes at the 5 so that you have like solid defensive minutes at the 5, so you have more of that offensive mismatch. At the same time, I'd be worried about letting him get into the restricted free agency market next summer, because we saw what happens in a cap poor market this past offseason, where the saying it only takes one team, and Charlotte comes with that just bonkers Gordon Hayward offer. There are going to be more teams like in that, like that have cap space next offseason. And John Collins is young and he's a really good player. And so if you don't want to get into him for max money, or you're worried about having 2 max players on the roster because Trae's extension eligible after next year, I wonder if that puts any like extra urgency on the Hawks to maybe want to get an extension done, especially since they've now taken themselves out of the cap space game for next offseason by signing Bogey and Gallo.
Well, I mean, it is a risk, obviously, because you don't know who's going to come in and offer what, So, I mean, you make a good point. It is a risk. I mean, I do think that, X's and O's wise, there are John definitely took a step forward defensively last year. It wasn't like a leap, but it was a step. But, I do think that there are some questions about, exactly how good of a defender he's going to develop into, which I still think he's like taking those steps. But yeah, there are some questions there, and you're right. Like it is a risk if you choose to just let things play out, because like you said, Charlotte could come in and offer Gordon Hayward everything.
John Collins is actually on the upswing. Like
Right. And so So I don't know. But at the same time, like, do what if you're so far apart, in negotiations this time around? Because, like last year, you can certainly make the argument he had a statistically best season by far, but he also did not play very much because of that 25-game suspension violating the NBA's drug policy. Now, so, that's 25 games. So it's a smaller sample size.
That's a good point.
Because of those 25 games that he missed, and also through no fault of his own or anyone's own, their season was cut short 15 games, because they didn't go to the bubble. So it's a smaller sample size that you're working with there. There are some defensive questions, but he was just offensively excellent last year. One of the few players in the league to average 20 plus points, 10 plus rebounds, came out of nowhere shooting 40.1% from three, led the team, not in a gigantic sample size, but still,
right.
Or not at a super high volume, I should say rather. So, I mean, there's a lot to love about John's game, but I think maybe it'll come down to how far apart are they when it comes to money.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right. If he wants the max, then there's literally no harm in waiting, because that's just going to be the same money to keep him next offseason if that ends up being his market.
Right. And so maybe what you like, one option would be if okay, so you did that last season, let's see what you can do this season, and let's kind of see where it goes. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, it'll just depend on how far apart they are and how willing they are to let things play out.
Do you think they're going to end up defaulting to Rondo in that backup point guard spot? Will Kevin Huerter maybe compete for some of those minutes? Will Dunn? Can you please tell me they don't plan on playing Dunn and Rondo together? Because I just feel like that's going to be a catastrophe.
That would be interesting. So I think that especially initially, they'll probably use Rondo and kind of see how that goes. But he hasn't been playing in the preseason, which is not surprising. I mean, he's an older guy, and he's coming off of a very intense, finals and everything. So that's not surprising. So I actually have not seen him play yet, Rondo. So I don't know what Rondo will be getting. I don't know what's gonna happen with that. But no, I mean, I think that they'll, I definitely think that they really did need another passer. They did. And Rondo's still a good passer. He's very cerebral. I think he's going to help them a lot. Like, this is a team that did not talk enough on the court last year, especially defensively, because they were young and they just didn't have a whole lot of super vocal guys. Mm-hmm. This year it is getting a lot better. And a lot of that is because you have guys like Clint who are not afraid to just, yell. You have guys who are getting older who are not afraid. You have Solomon Hill, who's really loud. So I think particularly at the beginning, Rondo's really going to help as far as organization and using his voice. And then, depending on how that goes and how often Rondo plays, then, yeah, I mean, Kevin Huerter last year was a backup point guard when he wasn't, starting on the wing or wherever, or hurt. So yeah, no, he brings good passing as well. I think that they'll also situationally use Brandon Goodwin, who can come off the bench and he's like an energy guy. So yeah, I mean, there's still like some questions of exactly how that'll go, because you're right. Like, how does Rondo fit alongside XYZ guy? Kris Dunn, how are we going to use him? Like, are we just going to lock him in on a matchup defensively? Mm-hmm. So I don't know exactly how that'll go, but I do think that one thing that does help this team that is underrated is Kevin Huerter's ability to create and pass, which a lot of people don't look at him in that way. But when you actually watch games in and game in and game out, that's something that really helps them. So if he's on the second unit, even if Rondo's out there too, you have another good passer. So yeah, the second, who's going to exactly be backup point guard? Like, I haven't seen Rondo yet. but that's what I would assume they would do.
You know, talking through this roster with you, it makes me wonder if this team, assuming it's just firmly in the playoff mix, they're like built to make another move. Just when you look at sort of the excess of options they have, plus you have like some salary matching fodder with Tony Snell's $12.2 million. And I would just assume whether he's bought out or traded that he's just not going to finish the season with this team. Although who knows, maybe injuries dictate something else. Do you get that sense too? Like just looking at the makeup of this roster?
Well, I don't even have to really assume that because Travis Schlenk in a availability with media was very open and forthcoming, which you got to appreciate as a media member. Like you gotta appreciate when someone's honest. And he said that, we're in position because of, like you pointed out, the salary matching capability we have with like the vets we have that, we're paying the way we are. And then also the young talent that a lot of people like. And by the way, now we can see, this comment was made like a month or two ago. Now we can see those guys are playing really well. Like we've talked about Deandre Hunter, Kevin Huerter, Cam Reddish. So you have young talent that a lot of people around the league are intrigued by or like, and you have salary matching capabilities. And Travis Schlenk was kind of open and said, potentially we're in, he's not committal, but he did say, potentially we're in position to acquire a star. If that were to be made available and if we decide to do that. And he was like, I'm not saying we are. And it's like, well, it sounds like you kind of are, there's some verbal gymnastics there. But yeah, and I mean, you're right. They do have, both of those things combined give you the ability to do that. So yeah, we'll buckle up.
From an aesthetics perspective, I really hope, at least not until the middle of the season, that they're not a team that gets involved in the Harden sweepstakes. Just from a pure basketball aesthetics perspective, I don't want to watch Harden and Trae Young on the same team.
I don't know. I don't think that would, and this is no knock against James Harden, who's obviously, a fantastic player. I don't know that I like the fit that much, which I know a lot of people are like, oh, don't talk about fit. It's about talent. I don't know, but I don't know that would work very well. I think that, I think the Hawks are pretty committed to, Trae's our guy, Trae's our organizer, Trae's our guy, they're kind of, I don't want to say similar, but, they're both, I don't know. I think that would be a little bit of overlap. I don't know that to me, that doesn't make much sense.
No, I would totally agree with you. I'm sure they would be like good just because James Harden is really good.
You'd score 10,000 points a game, but Yeah,
you've mentioned their defense too, like, 1,000 times throughout the podcast. If you're targeting a star or just a player, like it has to be someone who adds something on that end of the floor at this point. Like you've loaded up on offense enough.
Right. No, that's a good point. And that brings me back to, we're going to have to see how this team does defensively. Kris Dunn will certainly add a lot with that. And Clint already is, even though he's not up to speed. But yeah, no, you're right. Like if this team at this point were to add something else, you'd have to be defensive minded. And that's something where with Trae, who I will say has looked better defensively through, the whopping sample size of 2 preseason games. He had like a scrappy like strip of Aaron Gordon. And I was like, all right, Trae. So I think he's like, and he said he's looking to improve defensively, but with his size and with the way he struggles on defense, you kind of have to structure the team that way anyway.
Right.
You kind of have to surround him with, above average to good defenders in order to have a good defense. And I think they feel that they've done that a little bit with like the way they can play Cam Reddish with him and stuff like that. But we'll just have to see exactly how that goes. But he has looked a little better defensively.
What's gonna be do you think the most common closing lineup for this team? And I'm sure just given the breadth of options that they have, it will be very matchup based, but if you had to sort of pick like the 5 that you think are going to end up closing, the most crunch time games, who would be your picks there?
Ooh, right now I'm writing down names as we talk. So are they trailing or leading at this time, or is the game tied? Give me some scenarios here.
Let's just say plus, or like the NBA.com like definition, plus or minus 5 points. Like they or unless you just think that it's going to be so fluid because they're built to do crunch time that way. Because I think the natural inclination would be just put your 5 best players on the floor, but your 5 best players, I don't know what like that ends up being defensively, but yeah.
But your 5 best players might not be defensively strong enough, because if
only one of them is like above average.
Because if you put Gallo out there as opposed to Deandre Hunter, then you're not, I don't know that you're going to be defensively strong enough. So, I guess that's a good point. So if you're ahead enough, it doesn't matter, right? So Trae, maybe situationally, like let's say they're ahead by like 1, maybe situationally, I could honestly see Kris Dunn out there.
Okay.
If they're trying to be, defensive conscious. Clint Capela for sure. Deandre Hunter. I'm going way out of order, but people can assume where Clint Capela doesn't play the 3. Trae, Kris Dunn, maybe Deandre Hunter, probably John Collins and Capela, maybe. And the only thing, like Bogey would start. So I guess the only change there is putting Kris Dunn out there. And who knows? Like really, that's just kind of an answer off the cuff. Like who knows? But if they were really trying to be defensive minded, but at the same time, if you get like an open shot, like you have Trae right there to like knock it down,
Right.
So then probably the only change I would have is Kris Dunn out there. If you're trying to keep a lead, and he's out there guarding, whatever wing has, like, let's say, dominated the Hawks last year, and you're like, okay, we're putting Kris on him. So that's probably the only change I would make from the lineup that they have been starting. But it'll be situational. Ask me again in a few weeks.
Is there a chance that Trae Young ends up being like the only crunch time lock for this team? Or is it like, no, John Collins will definitely play down the stretch, or no, Clint Capela will be in no matter what? Like, I'm having trouble identifying the second player who they just won't move out of their crunch time lineup no matter what.
I think probably Clint. I think probably an up-to-speed Clint I would put in there, because defensively you need that rim protecting guy, and he also is very vocally important for them. Like he really has made a difference, I think, organizing them. And you can just tell, as far as just holding that back line, like that's something that they're really getting a boost from him. So I would say a healthy Clint. I would say a healthy Clint is crunch time, yes, because I mean it depends maybe, because Collins can play the 5 and did so very well last season, but defensively I would want Clint at the 5 crunch time.
Is there, if you were, let's say you're just Lloyd Pierce, is there like a quirky lineup, offbeat lineup that you would try to trot out given this personnel at any point this season? No specific situation, just to test out and see if it works.
Probably seeing what Gallo can do at different positions. Let's say you're just going like offense first and just, I would honestly be intrigued with like a Gallo at the 3, Collins at the 4, Capela at the 5, and just kind of seeing what happens there. And then, whatever they want to do at the 1 and 2. And then also, I think as far as second unit, I think this is a less specific answer, but just watching a lot of lineups last year that were, second unit struggles, and they really couldn't do much at all, without Trae. I think I'm interested to see Rondo, like a Kevin Huerter, a Cam Reddish together, and just seeing how much that can help boost them, as far as just passing and the ability to hit guys and the ability to get open shots.
What I would really like to see, and I have 100% confidence that we will not see, is the Clippers when they had Gallo, they tested him out at the 5, and it was a very small sample size, but they just annihilated everyone. I would love to see Gallo and Trae, and then Hunter, Dunn, and Reddish. Just surround them with 3 defenders and see what happens. I don't know why you would want Capela, Collins, and Bogey on the bench at the same time. That's just a lot of like money and equity wrapped up. But I would just love to see it for like a few possessions here and there at a time. I'm a sucker for the small ball 5 lineups, and so
I love a small ball 5 lineup. You know, they actually did do that in their second preseason game versus the Magic, which was day before last. Again, losing track of time. But they did put Gallo at the 5 for like a minute. You know,
I ask.
Yeah. Like 60 seconds of Gallo at the 5. But he's just such a dynamic guy. And honestly, no matter where they put him, it's just hard to emphasize how much guys like him and Bogey boost this team, you know, and a lot of it is just, you know, they just added quality guys, you know, and it's just been fun already to kind of watch Trae Young, who's, you know, everyone's just kind of like slowly warming up, you know, it's preseason. But already it's just been fun to watch this team have depth and have options, because so often last season, if one guy wasn't there, you were kind of like, what are they going to do? And now they have so many options, and it's been fun to watch in a small sample size so far.
What do you think is, you know, given everything that they've done, and you can factor in if you think they're going to make a major change or not at all, what would be a realistic, you know, win total and Eastern Conference finish for this team? I checked this morning, their win total over under is set at 36.5, which for people like me who can't think in 72 game terms, equates to 42 wins in an 82 game season, which seems, there are definitely questions about the defense. And I am worried about teams that did make a lot of changes over the offseason, just because there wasn't really an offseason or a training camp. So like, how long does it take to tie together? But 42 seems low, like 42 win equivalent, obviously.
It seems low. I think one thing, like, I'm exactly like you. I cannot think in 72 game terms. This is my second season covering the Hawks, and I'm like, I just got used to 82 games. So it's hard to think in. It's hard to adjust for 72. Another thing that I'm struggling to picture in my head is how good the rest of the East is going to be, because we've got a healthy Kevin Durant. You know, like you've got other kind of other teams. I'm just like, okay, now Charlotte's got Gordon Hayward. You know, like how it's hard for me to, I guess, comparatively put them. Like every time I think about their win total, I feel like I think of it as far as where would they have been last season? Because last season, a really good benchmark for the Hawks is like, okay, can we be better than the Magic? You know, like, can we like hop above that level? Right. They're kind of like locked in at like number 8-ish, it seems. Can we be better than them? We get to that point. But now it's so hard. It's so hard to guesstimate with how different the East looks this year. I guess, okay, so 36.5 is like kind of the line. I think they have the potential to do a little better than that, but I don't know if it will happen, because that assumes everyone stays healthy, and that assumes that Kris Dunn fits in as a defender that's going to really help them, you know? And I think he will, but I just haven't seen it yet. He's not. And he's probably going to be out for the first 2 games of the season with an injury. So I'm kind of banking on, if I were to say they're doing a little bit better than that, I'm banking on him being a really good matchup defender for them. But I think they have the potential to do a little bit better than that. But I don't know. I don't want to Sharpie that, if that makes sense.
I already Sharpied them in as the over on the podcast I did for the over-unders. So you're probably better off going in the opposite direction of what I chose for them. But it's still kind of the same question this year, though, that you were asking yourself last year, is can they be better than the Magic? Because, well, and I guess the play-in tournament matters. I haven't really started thinking about the postseason in terms of top 10.
That's something that's really intriguing to me too, because it's like, if you can get to a point where even just mentally, like, so last season, and I've referred people who are listening to this who've read anything I've written are probably like, please stop referencing this because I reference it all the time. But last season there was it was in the beginning of March. So not long before the season got suspended, and the Hawks were playing the Grizzlies. They played 2 games against the Grizzlies, and the Grizzlies were fighting like tooth and nail to hold on to their seed, to their spot, and you could just tell like the Hawks were kind of like, your season's kind of over and it, and the Grizzlies are like, no, like, like, so it's funny how there can be like that mental aspect to it sometimes. Right. Like, okay, if they get to, it would be interesting to see this team and it's a very different looking team anyway. But like if they're in it late, I could see them, getting to that play-in tournament, which I think is a really cool idea. I think that really incentivizes teams late in the season, and just, late in the season when you're so far when you're so low in the standings, you kind of almost feel like, what are we playing for? It
gives the Knicks something to shoot for in the future. Spot, so
right, it's a fun concept, and I could see them kind of surging if they get into a situation like that. So because you're playing those like late meaningful minutes, and they just didn't have that last season.
Yeah.
So I guess I would take the over, but of the 36.5, but don't Sharpie that because it's pretty.
I already Sharpied it on my end, so. But it is the same question if you're looking at the top 8 spots. Like, can they be better than the Magic? Because I think if you look at the East, barring something seismic, Bucks, Raptors, Celtics, Pacers, Heat, Sixers, and Nets, those are 7 playoff spots right there. And so there are 3 more because of the play-in tournament, but you probably just want to be like in one of the top 8 because then you have to lose twice in the play-in tournament to get bounced. And so it's, Washington, I guess it's the question, can you be better than Washington and Orlando? I've already written off Charlotte. I know some people think that they might be frisky. I'm out on them. I think the Bulls end up tearing it down. So those are the 2 teams that I'm looking at. You want to be better than one of them so you can finish in 10th. But I honestly don't have a feel. My guess would be that they would be the 8th, one of the 8 teams. That's where I have them penciled in now. But the East is it's so wonky at the bottom.
It's always kind of, I say it's always, this is my second season covering the team. It definitely gets a little wonky at the bottom for sure. What I've seen of them so far, if they can be the offensive team that they seem like they can be, and if they can just be good enough defensively, then I think that I think that this team can be, much, much better. But, again, that's assuming everybody stays healthy. This is a weird season because we're still in a pandemic. So, there's going to be a lot of, look at what has happened to this college football season, so who knows who stays healthy, how the season goes. But I do think they have the potential to be much, much better.
That's where their options come in handy, and I hate analyzing it like that, but because you're bound to have the COVID scares, like having so much depth is going to be big this year.
I think that'll be a big benefit to them because they have so many guys who can go in there, and I think you won't you're not going to dip too much, you're not going to take too much of a hit as far as production. But, like you said, you hate to look at it that way because hopefully everyone just stays healthy and no one gets ill.
My final question for you is how much pressure, given all the changes that the Hawks made, is Lloyd Pierce under this year? And is there any iota of truth to, we saw reports come out that his and Trae Young's relationship isn't the best, I guess would be the best way to put it based off what we heard.
Well, I think that I think that when you've been talking about the playoffs since March, when it was kind of almost an interesting time that he first said it because, the games I just mentioned about Memphis when they got blown out, that was when he first said that I think we're going to make like playoffs is the next progression for us, the next step of the progression for us. And I was kind of like, whoa, just because of what had just happened, and they were struggling, I think when you've been talking about the playoffs for so long, and players are on board with it. And now, regardless of that, now that you have a roster that is built to win more, I don't know exactly how many wins. Now that you
over 36.5.
Right, that's my stance right now, I guess. But now that you have a roster that is just, the past 2 years and last year that I'll speak to because I was there, it was difficult because just like how a lot of people who don't really watch the Hawks will kind of blame Trae Young for them being bad, it's kind of like the same thing with Lloyd Pierce, but like he didn't really have anyone to go to. Like they had kind of 5 guys, and they were rebuilding. He didn't really have anybody to go to that often. So it's like, what do you do? He was in a hard situation. Now I think he's in a good situation. So yes, I do think that there's, I guess, a little bit more just because this is a roster that can do much more than what it's been capable of the past few seasons. So you want to meet or exceed those expectations. So by that nature, yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of, this is the first time maybe he's had more like expectations, on him. So you have to, rise to that occasion. And it looks like he's got the guys to do it, so you just have to see what happens there. I think as far as things with Trae, I think it'll be interesting this season because I think Trae is someone who, really wants to win.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of a, I guess, stigma around him that like he's all about individual stats and it doesn't, he can't win. But again, the roster wasn't built to win around.
Yeah, what have you given him to win with?
Right. Like you got to be, I feel like a lot of people who are saying that, you got to be realistic about what they had, and, but a lot of times Trae Young's the only name people know on the team, so they'll blame it. You know what I mean? Like you have to kind of look into, wait, why weren't they good? So I think this season, I think that Trae is going to be, it was funny, people who are like, oh, he's about individual stats. Like, well, I saw him after losses. He's not a happy camper. He's not, I felt like that is not a correct, I guess, stigma. So I think this season he will be maybe happier because he's because he wants to win, and now he has the roster to do so. If that makes sense, not to speak for him, but he's a guy who wants to win, and he wants to win in Atlanta, and now he has the pieces to do so. So I think a lot of things, being on a losing team is not fun, and I think a lot of things are going to be set up for success as far as Trae as kind of the face of the franchise because he has a better roster around him. And I think, I just think this roster overall is kind of set up for success more.
Is there anything I didn't ask you about this team that you wanted to talk about, or anything that the national media misperceives about them? Any ultra spicy Nathan Knight takes? Not really. I think I kind of said it in my last answer, which is that this year is going to be a much better measuring stick for Trae Young, for maybe Lloyd Pierce, for just Atlanta overall, because now they have the pieces in place. Before, it's just hard to measure with the roster that they had. They were rebuilding. They weren't supposed to be, or I guess they weren't built to win necessarily. They were rebuilding, and now they feel like they're, they feel like they're at the end of their rebuild, and now they should start winning. So this year is going to be the better measuring stick for like, okay, Trae Young, what can he do with this team? Lloyd Pierce, what can he do with this team? Whereas before, just kind of hard to measure with the way that things were. Yeah. So I think this year is going to be a really fun season for kind of assessing that and just watching them play. It's a better team, and so I think this year is going to be, a fun one for Atlanta. Sarah, this was great. Thank you for giving me so much of your time, number one. If you guys are not following Sarah on Twitter, remedy that post haste. She is at Sarah_K_Spence, SPENCE. She covers the Atlanta Hawks for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Once more, thank you so much. And I'm sure I'll be bothering you again down the line.
Yeah, this was so fun. Thank you so much for having me, and we'll have to do this again.